Elizabeth, how are you?
I am so excited, ready for this conversation. I'm great.
I'm so glad to hear that and so happy to have you here.
Let's do this. I have been looking forward to this all week.
Yes, I love the energy. And so we're just going to dive right in with what does confidence mean to you?
To me, I came up with my own definition of confidence that I've used with a lot of my clients. So, confidence is the belief in the certainty or reliability of something or someone. And I like this definition because it kind of flips it on its head from what most people think of when they talk about confidence. Most people refer to a feeling as confidence. And I really believe that confidence is actually a mindset. It is something that you believe in, even in moments of uncertainty, and even when things are chaotic and kind of going crazy, there's always something that we can root ourselves in, that we are sure of, or that we can count on to be reliable. And so there's always an opportunity to cultivate confidence no matter what the situation is.
I love that. And I think it's so true because our feelings come and go and they give us context into what's going on, but they're not always reliable or indicative of what's happening. And so having the definition that you just posed of confidence really helps us be grounded and rooted in the fact that I don't have to know everything that's going on or what will happen, but I know fundamentally that I'm okay.
Yes.
Trust and security in who I am and where I am.
Yes. And when we can focus on anchoring ourselves in the things that we're certain about and in the things that have been reliable in the past for us, we can end up feeling the kind of confident that we're looking for, right? So the mindset of confidence can lead to the feeling of confidence if we let it.
100%. And speaking of confidence, you have had quite the journey yourself. And I want to know how you've had to tap into your own sense of self-security and confidence to lead the life that you live today, because you started off in the government sector doing nonprofit work, economic planning, and now you are a life coach, which is two completely different paths.
So I ask myself that all the time. How did I get here? What is going on? And the funny thing is, when I think about it, the two separate careers aren't as separate and unrelated as they appear to be. Actually, I'll tell you this story. So several years ago, while I was still in economic development, I got a new boss and she was great, but I didn't know her at all. So she was coming in and she decided to do that. We should take the Strength Finders test together, which she said she liked to do in all the organizations that she worked with and with all of her employees. And I had never done it. And I'm a personal development junkie, right? So I love all the personality tests and I've taken a bunch of them. But at that point, I hadn't taken Strength Finders yet. So I took the Strength Finders and I remember getting my results. And one of my top 5 strengths was developer, which refers to like developing things in other people. And I looked at the test at that time. This was before it was really good. And I was like, I don't see this. I don't know what this is talking about. This one feels off. And the other 4 that I got, the other 4 strengths in my top 5 seemed really relevant and I could see exactly how they fit into my life. And it wasn't until about 2 years later when I found kind of my knack for coaching and I felt pulled into coaching. And I was like, oh, I've been developing people through my work of economic development. And it's just a different way of developing people. And so it kind of pulled it all together for me. And so I've been able to see that they're not as unrelated as I thought they were. But when it comes to confidence, I had to learn how to act before I feel fully confident. I think that's the biggest thing that I've had to figure out how to do in this whole journey.
Yeah, I think learning how to act is key. But I want to turn it back for a second to something that you said, which is you didn't really see how your strengths aligned. And I think that's a lot of times, when we're learning about ourselves and going through these phases of self-development, we uncover these strengths that we either didn't know that we had or don't know how to call out or identify given the context that we're currently using them as. And for me, I was a science nerd. And so having strengths that align with, empathy and personal development were things I'm like, I know. I'm, crunching numbers. I'm very like fact-based and hard. And that's how I presented myself. But that wasn't necessarily where I needed to be. And I think it's really important to identify, how we're using our strengths versus how we are self-actualizing our lives and our potential, because those are two completely different things. And like what I like to say is not our strengths, but our path and our calling is what we would do if we were not getting paid for it. Like, what would you do regardless of the paycheck? And I can tell you now what I was doing is I would need to get paid from the check.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of my career in economic development was kind of like that. I had these parts of myself that I liked and I enjoyed that I would kind of put in a box and stuff away when I was going to work, because I thought they had nothing to do with this career. And I spent so many years trying to kind of climb the ladder in a career that wasn't fully a great fit for me because I was denying such a big part of who I was. So a lot of my career in economic development, I was working against the grain for myself. So the bureaucracy, I made a terrible bureaucrat. I'm going to tell you this. I absolutely made a terrible bureaucrat because I was always trying to buck the system. I was not the rule follower. I was not the one that was like, yeah, let's put a process together. I was always like in trouble because I wasn't following the processes, or I was like finding all the exceptions. And over time, I ended up trying to like channel that into a type of advocacy to kind of fix systems and processes that were broken, right? And to better serve the community and actually meet the goals that our organizations had. But yeah, I made a terrible bureaucrat as long as I was trying to deny that part of myself. So yeah, I think we have to, like, my philosophy is that everything that's inside of us is inside of us for a reason.
Yeah.
And so I kind of got to a point where I stopped trying to be someone I wasn't. And I was like, well, if this is who I am, how can I bring my whole self into whatever it is that I'm doing?
That's a key question. And if I can't bring my whole self, then what do I need to be doing differently? So you started your coaching practice, I think it was back in 2018 as a side gig, but now you do it full time. That was not what you had planned.
It was not the plan.
So when did it become clear that, we go, okay, self-actualization, discovery, I know my strengths, to I want to coach, to now I want to do this full time. I understand that it's my calling and it's time to make this switch?
So I started coaching in 2018 because I was interested in it. And I saw it as a great way to pull together all of the different skills that I had been underutilizing. And then in 2019, I would say maybe late 2019, I had actually changed jobs. I was still in the nonprofit sector, still doing economic development work. And I had really pulled back from coaching to give myself time to settle into my new role and, kind of learn the community that I was working in and, expand my network, yada, yada, yada. And I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe my phase is over, right? Like maybe it's one of those things that I picked up because it was interesting at the time and maybe I'm done with it. And it was like God tapped me on my shoulder and he was like, what are you doing? It's time to pick the coaching back up. It's not going away. And I got like this very clear message that it wasn't just something that I was choosing. It was a path that God was placing me on. And my job is to walk the path wherever it leads for however long the path goes. So I kind of dove back into in 2019 as I was still, building my career, and I was juggling the two. And then 2020, here comes the pandemic and everything changed like it did for everyone, right? And what happened was life got super chaotic. And I found myself at this moment where I was working at home for the first time, like a lot of the world. And I'm at home with my daughter who was in kindergarten at the time. So I'm trying to do virtual kindergarten with her while I'm working my job. Hot mess express. And
I don't have kids. I couldn't even handle my own self. So kudos to all the moms out there. I'm gonna let you finish, but like, yes, hands down.
I can't even say it was an adventure. It was chaos was what it was. And I also found myself in this place where, because of the nature of my work and, the crisis that the community was facing because of the pandemic, I found myself working 12-hour shifts from home, right? At my dining room table with my daughter, like watching YouTube videos and trying to hula hoop in the living room, right? Because we're socially isolating. And I'm worried about my parents because they're older and immune compromised. And my husband is still leaving the house for work every day and just trying to figure out how to get groceries without dying, right? Like, it was a lot. And after like realizing, okay, this pandemic isn't going away, this is going to be something that we have to deal with for a while, I said to myself one day, okay, this is not sustainable. What do I do? And so I leaned on my own tools in coaching. So I started myself a lot more. And then I realized, well, if I need this, the world needs this too. And suddenly there was lots of interest and demand in coaching as well. So I kind of leaned into coaching and I got great responses from the world in 2020 and then in 2021 as well. And I realized, oh, like, actually, I'll say this. I think in 2021, I had this shift from it's something I do to having the identity of I am a coach, no matter what my job is. Mm-hmm. And showing up differently and believing that was a total game changer for me. And I think it's part of what led to just the opportunity that landed at my feet for me to go full time in coaching, and stepping out on faith and saying yes and going all in.
I love that. And I think it's really crucial because sometimes we're not going to feel it. It will tap us on the shoulder. But if it is for you, like truly for you, and you have some level of confirmation about that, even before anything happens, everything will fall into place. And that's whether you're a coach, whether you're, venturing off to LA to pursue like stardom, whatever it is, if it's for you, things will fall into place. It's divine order.
Yep.
It's happening for you. It will be manifested. You have to do your part, right? Like we have to take action and be intentional about the steps that we're taking, but there's no need to worry about, oh, how am I going to like meet my calling, or what am I going to do to fulfill this destiny? It's a calling because it's calling you. Right?
Yes.
You don't have to do anything for it. It's calling you in. And so the path is already set. You just have to follow it, knowing that you're following this road where you don't see more than like 5 steps ahead. And if you got 5 steps ahead, you're lucky. Usually it's like 1 to 2 steps.
Half a step, maybe.
The top of my foot while I take the next, like literally. But if it's for you, it will be for you. So I want to talk more about how you juggled all of those responsibilities, because you talked about, all of the hats you wear, from being a mom to a professional to a friend and a wife. And how did, dividing up all of those responsibilities take a toll on your mindset? And how did you actually approach your responsibilities?
Yeah, I will actually say that before I found mindset work, I was dropping a lot of the balls as I was trying to juggle. And I felt like a huge failure. Yeah. I think I felt like I was okay. I think I put on this air of confidence that I did not feel, but I always felt like I was drowning. I felt like I was inadequate, felt like I was one mistake away from chaos and crisis, right? That's a really stressful way to live. And when I found like coaching and mindset work, I was able to just figure out a different approach. Honestly, learning to approach accountability and self-accountability from a different way, it allowed me to give myself the permission I needed to not have to juggle so many balls, right? So if I'm trying to juggle 12 balls and I can't keep, 8 of them in the air, I can put some down so I don't have to juggle that much, right? If some of the balls are glass, right, we're going to focus on not dropping those, and we're going to bounce the rubber ones because they'll come back around and we'll be fine. So I had to learn how to get super clear on what was really important, why I felt it was important. I think the other thing that I really learned was I had to honor the seasons of my life that I was in. Motherhood was the big T. I learned so much by becoming a mom. And I only have one kid, by the way. My daughter asked me to mention her by name on this podcast interview today. Her name is Naomi. She is a joy and a delight, and she has taught me so much. But becoming her mom taught me so much because I had a great pregnancy. I literally worked up until the day I went into labor.
So really juggling all of the balls, all of the time.
I literally, this is so terrible. So I had terrible work-life boundaries at the time. So the evening that I went into labor, I didn't leave the office until like 6:30 p.m. that evening.
Mm.
Oh no, terrible. Like legit terrible. I look back and I'm like, what was I doing? Why did I feel the need to do that? But because I had such a great pregnancy and I had a pretty uneventful labor and delivery, and she was such a good baby, and you know, I have a husband and I have lots of family support in the area. I thought that I was just going to have like my little 2-month maternity leave, and then I was going to step back into the life that I had before she was born. I thought maternity leave was just maternity leave, and I did not realize that life with a newborn was a different phase of life. And so I set myself up for frustration because I tried to do things that people that don't have newborns at home would do. And I had to learn how to honor the season of motherhood that looks like having a newborn. And then they become babies and they, you know, things change. Like you get a little bit more sleep, right? And so your brain isn't as fried as much. So maybe you can do more critical thinking. And then, you know, having a toddler is very different than having a baby. And just learning how to really honor each of those seasons that came with motherhood taught me just such an invaluable lesson about what honoring priorities looks like. Like everything that's a priority does not get honored the same way, and it doesn't require the same type of attention or even the same amount of time. Yeah.
How do you, though, prioritize? I know we all have our tactics, but there are times and moments, right, where it feels like, you know, the walls are coming in on us and everything is a priority. So tell me a little bit about your process to say, this is a ball I have to drop in this season of my life.
That's the $1 million question, right? I think the very first thing to acknowledge is that priorities are dynamic and not static.
Yeah.
Right. So, and even when we have like a universal priority, so for example, my marriage is a priority for me. My marriage as one of my top priorities in my life does not always require the same thing of me. Right. So there are seasons within my marriage where my husband and I need to spend more time together, or seasons where we actually need more space from each other. Right. Seasons where we need to have fun together, and seasons where we need to have tough conversations, right? And so prioritizing my marriage looks differently depending on what my marriage needs from me. So I can be prioritizing my marriage and, you know, only going on an actual date with my husband like once every 2 months. That doesn't mean I'm not prioritizing my marriage, right? Depending on what season of marriage we're in. Likewise, prioritizing like time with my daughter doesn't have to look like me not working. I think one of the things that I've really focused on is intentional parenting and deciding what kind of parent I want to be, and deciding that I can model the kind of examples for my daughter that will be helpful for her to like grow up and become a good citizen and lead a good, fulfilling life based on what I show her that I do, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I model for my daughter that the only way I can be a good mom is to, you know, neglect my career and neglect my husband and only spend time with her, what I'm modeling for her is that the only way to be a mom is to not have a life outside of her. And that's not the message that I want her to learn, because if she grows up and becomes that kind of mom, it becomes a cycle that, you know, women end up perpetuating. And I don't want that. So my brand of intentional parenting looks like me pulling her into life to show her this is what adulting looks like. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it kind of sucks.
Oh, and that's real. That's so real. And I love because you just kind of brushed over it, but you talked about, and not using these words, generational trauma and how we hand things down, generational cycles. And so I love your approach to intentional parenting, and whether it's just showing your daughter what balance looks like or being very intentional in other aspects, which I'm sure you are, is one of the ways that we can ensure that we don't pass down these kind of learned behaviors that we don't even realize are affecting our ability to show up in our best way.
100%. I remember my first few months of motherhood, just realizing how much I didn't know about motherhood. Not just how much, like as a kid, I had no idea what my mom's perspective was, right? And that just having a teeny tiny baby that belonged to me, all of a sudden, my perspective shifted. And I saw my mom and I saw our relationship as mother and daughter in a completely different light. And I went through a phase where, like, I would run into random women who were moms and I would just randomly thank them and be like, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Thank you for all you do. They're like, what? Because I was just like, seriously, as a non-mom, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And now I have a little bit of an idea, and my baby's like 2 weeks old, right? So yeah, I have had so many aha moments where I'm like participating in maybe an argument. I try not to argue with my daughter because I don't like losing. She has amazing logic, and it embarrasses me when I lose an argument with her. But I have these moments, right, where I'm having conversations or debates where I'm trying to just life, right, with my daughter, and we're not seeing eye to eye. We are not on the same page. And it's like I'll have a deja vu of a similar situation where I remember being in my daughter's shoes and my mom was in my shoes. And now I'm replaying and reliving that moment from a different perspective. And I'm like, oh, the thing that I thought was happening as a kid was really just my mom doing her best. Or when I felt like my mom didn't care about whether or not I had a Halloween costume, it was the fact that she was, at the height of her professional career and she was juggling these types of stresses, and she was feeling inadequate for not cooking dinner that night, and here I go saying, oh, I need a Halloween costume. And it's not that she didn't care, it's just that that was the ball that she dropped, right? And so seeing it differently and experiencing differently gives me the ability to decide, you know what, instead of trying to like do all this stuff and make it look effortless, I'm going to show my daughter the kinds of choices that I'm making, right? So if I can't take my daughter to the activity that she wants to go to, I'm going to explain to her, I have X, Y, and Z, and this is the thing that I have to do for this particular reason. And I really want you to be able to spend time with your friends, but this time it's not going to happen, right? And letting her know that it's not because I don't care. And then also showing her, this is how I'm going to show you that I do care, right? Because I think as parents, I think maybe even especially in like Black households and Black families, there's kind of that culture of like grown folks business, right? And grown folks don't talk about grown folks business with kids, right? But kids are whole people. They have feelings and personalities. And even if they don't understand things from a grown-up perspective, there's always a way to help increase communication and understanding.
Yeah.
That's what I try to do.
Yeah, this is incredible. And I know some of the work that you do, because you touched on a lot here, and part of it's time management, people management, life
boundaries.
But one of the things that you work on with your clients actually is self-management. And I know that juggling all of the different hats you wear, you have to do a lot of that. But what is self-management and how is it different from time management, and how does it then affect our lives?
Yeah. So when I talk to folks about time management, I like to immediately just turn it on its head and say, there's no such thing as time management, because you can't manage time. There's nothing that we can do to get time to flow in a different direction or at a different pace. Like, time is what it is until we no longer have any because we're not here. And so when we stop trying to control the uncontrollable thing that is time, the only thing left for us to control and manage is ourselves and how we show up in any given moment, right? And so just being able to let that land and being able to grasp that none of us have a problem with time. We might have a relationship with time that does not serve us, right? We may not always be aware of how time passes, and that's something that we can work on. But when we take full ownership over the time that we have and how we show up, that is the start of being able to create the life that you want for yourself. And self-management in that way ends up being the foundation of self-mastery.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so we have to start with self-management. Anyone who comes to me saying they have a time management problem has a self-management problem. And if we can get them to see that, we can flip it and turn it into self-mastery.
Yeah. And so I think that self-management is important when we look at it, and it really ties back to this word discipline, which is your word of the year.
Yeah.
So before we dive into what discipline means for you and where you are right now on your journey, can you share your process for developing self-management tactics?
Yeah. So it has to start with awareness. So all self-management has to start with awareness, because you can't manage or fix what you don't know exists. If you don't realize that there's a problem, you can't, institute a practice to solve for it. So an awareness sounds like it's only the first step, but it's truly the most powerful thing that we can do. And there are so many things. You will be surprised at the problems that will just melt away in your life if you simply see that they're there, right? There are some problems we have because we've never examined what's happening, right? Like, so let me use an analogy. So let's say your water bill is sky high. All right. And it's because you've got a leaky pipe, right? If you never go checking the pipes, you never think that your high water bill is a problem, because you're just using water, right? And this is just what it costs to use water, right? But if you have the awareness that there's a leak, of course you're going to choose to fix it, right? It's a one-time thing. And then it goes away, and all of a sudden your water bill is 3 times less, right? And it's just the awareness. It's the only thing that changes. And there are so many problems like that in life that are just leaky pipes. And if we knew that there was a leak, we would fix it immediately and it would go away.
I love that so much. Thank you. That is like the best example ever. So let's get back into discipline. First of all, what does discipline mean to you? And how did you come up with that as your word for the year? And do you have a ritual or a process to determine that?
Yeah. I'm so excited because I haven't yet announced my word of the year officially. So usually I'll do like a live, or I'll write a post or a blog post about it. And I haven't done that yet for 2023. So I'm excited to share it here first. You heard it here first. So my word for the year for 2023 is discipline. And discipline means for me, order that is necessary for instruction.
A whole word.
Order necessary for instruction. So, and I have to say, I didn't make this up, and I didn't pull it out of thin air. So my word of the year is always something that God gives to me. It's not something I choose. So, and when I was getting the meaning for discipline, I knew that discipline didn't mean punishment, right? Like you did something wrong, so now I have to discipline you. Like that wasn't what God was saying to me. It also wasn't just like I have to stick to a routine even though I don't feel like it, which is, I think, a lot of times, actually, it's how I've used the word discipline a lot in the past, right? But really, God was trying to show me something different. And order necessary for instruction is not a term I made up. It's actually like an antiquated definition for the word discipline. So over time, like through our society, we've conflated correction with discipline. And that's not kind of where the word discipline started. Like ultimately, the root of the word discipline is learning, and ordering. And so order necessary for instruction is where God was taking me with discipline this year. And so for me, that means that I'm looking for all the ways to bring order and more order into everything I have going on so that I can learn what I need to learn at this phase of my life. Because the converse of that is that disorder will block you from knowing what you need to know.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what you need to know, you can't go where you need to go.
Exactly.
I didn't mean to rhyme, but there we go.
Exactly. Bars. Exactly. So, and kind of back to how I get to my word of the year. So I've been rocking with God in my word of the year since 2018. Coincidentally, the same year that I started coaching, right? Actually, not a coincidence, right? Divine intervention. But every year, the word that God gives me, it builds on the word from the previous year, right? So I know that whatever word God is giving me and however it's going to show up in my life is going to prepare me for my next level, whatever my next level is going to be. So this started, like I said, back in 2018. So actually, this would have been the end of 2017. And I had already been, like, for years picking a one word for the year. I never really did resolutions. That was kind of my alternative to doing New Year's resolutions. But when I was choosing the words, like I was always just picking something random and something aspirational, right? So something that I wanted to do or a way that I wanted to see myself, but it was never connected to anything. It was never related to anything. There was no practice beside it. I was usually picking words that I thought sounded cool, which also meant that I didn't do anything with them. Like I would forget about them, within a couple of months, like nothing would happen. And so I'll never forget this. I was brainstorming for a word of the year for 2018 towards the end of 2017. And I had written a list of different possibilities. I was like, maybe this, maybe I'll pick that. And then I was in the car and God dropped the word alignment into my spirit. And I almost hit the brakes because I was like, what? That's the word. But he didn't just give me the word. He also gave me like the definition. And the definition that he gave me was alignment is getting things in order, but also getting the order of things right. And I was like, oh.
All of that. Yeah.
Oh. And I had the sense, like it had the flavor of preparation to it already. So I knew that like I wasn't getting alignment for the sake of alignment, that it was going to be necessary for whatever was coming next. And I was like, oh, I want to be ready. I don't know what's next, but I want to be ready. So let me get into alignment. And so I focused on that all year. And then in 2019, the word that he gave me was shift. And I thought, okay, there's going to be a big shift in my life. And there was. And it happened around July. And I was like, okay, God, this was the big shift. And God said to me, no, I'm shifting you all year. It's not a shift that's happening in your life. I am shifting you. And real talk, he continued to shift me right through December 31st of 2019. And then in 2020, the word he gave me was faithful. And that one felt really foreboding to me because it was both a reminder that God has always been faithful to me, but it was also a command for me to be faithful to like if me and God are in a relationship, God can't be the only one that's faithful in the relationship. I have to be faithful too.
Yeah.
But that there was going to be things that required faithfulness of me. And I'm like, oh, that sounds hard. I don't want that. And of course, what happened in 2020 was the pandemic, right? And it required so much faithfulness on my part. And then in 2021, the word I got was new. And I mean, right out of the gate in January, just lots of newness. But it wasn't just, again, new things happening. It was also, God gave me a scripture with that one, the one about not putting new wine in old wineskins. Right. And I was like, oh, okay. So I need to start like putting myself in, like, I need to stop treating myself like I'm still in my old life. Right.
Mhm.
Because I am new on the inside. So I need to start showing up new. And so that was an adventure. And then in 2020, my word was complete. And that was really about, it was like a balm on my soul. It was like a reminder of sufficiency, that I am complete, right? That everything that God has given me, I am completely equipped for the path that I'm on, even when I don't feel like it. That every experience that I was having was going to be complete in and of itself. And of course, because I'm being called to a higher level all the time, it was a reminder that I need to like close the loop on things and actually complete the things that I start. And so that was last year. So here I am in 2023, and my word is discipline. So it's order necessary for instruction. So I'm in a season of learning and getting it together.
We all need to get it together in some form or fashion. And so you hit on a lot there, but I want to talk about your personal journey as an entrepreneur and how your faith has guided that, because I think, you know, no matter what your belief is, it's really important to have some root or basis to help guide you in life. And so I would love to understand how your faith walk and your journey with God has inspired where you are today.
Yeah. The short answer is, if I had no faith, I wouldn't be an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
Period. End of discussion. Because if I were just doing what made sense to me, and if I were just doing kind of following the plan that I started 20 years ago, I would still be on I'd probably be 3 jobs behind where I was. I would still be in my career in economic development. And I would probably just be struggling all over. Which is not to say that entrepreneurship is not a struggle, because it definitely has its struggly seasons. I'll say that. But I think it goes back to part of what we said earlier in talking about coaching as being a calling. So when I kind of had the idea to start coaching, I thought I was choosing it, right? When really it was a call that I was answering, even if I didn't recognize it as such. And so coaching, again, it's not just a career, it's an identity for me. It's part of who I am. And so I'm going to show up as a coach, and ultimately, like, choosing entrepreneurship. Like I said, it was not the plan. The plan was to work a job with this stable income and benefits and retirement and all that, and, do coaching on the side to be in obedience. And what happened was God had to like send a giant unmissable message, right? Something that I could not misinterpret, that said, this is what you're meant to be doing. And so for me, stepping out fully into entrepreneurship as a full-time coach was me being obedient to my calling. So it's a huge part of just like how I set up my life. And it definitely is a big part of how I see the impact that I'm supposed to have on the world as a coach. Yeah, I'll say that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting though, because you have this very strong faith, and that really guides what you do or the belief that you have in yourself. But you don't identify as a Christian coach. You are a coach that is Christian. And I think that oftentimes when we think about people who identify as both Christian and entrepreneurs, both of those labels are used really within the same context, but you don't lead with that. Can you tell me how your faith comes out in your work?
Yeah. I love the fact that you just said not a Christian coach, but a coach that is Christian. That is the perfect way to describe it. Yeah, so I don't lead by identifying myself as a Christian coach because the coaching methodology that I use is not based on the principle of Christian faith, right? So I'm using principles that are based on like psychology and personal development, which is different. It doesn't conflict with my faith at all, but it's not rooted and based in faith, right? Um, but I'm never trying to hide who I am. Listen, if you have enough conversations with me, you will eventually, like, at some point, you're going to figure out that I grew up in church because I'm going to be like, amen, right?
Amen. Hallelujah.
It is gonna happen. I'm gonna say preach if I think you're saying a good thing, right? So it's easy to figure out that I'm a churched person and that we have enough conversations, like God is gonna come up and it's gonna come out of me. Um, and but I'll say this: I think it's important to have coaches who are Christians that leave space to work with clients that are not Christian or who, aren't in a place in their spiritual journey where they feel compelled to work with a Christian coach, right? Because it's important that we have like God's people out here serving others who may not yet have found God, and that we're holding the space to keep the door open, right? So whether I identify myself as a Christian coach or not, anytime I show up as a coach, I'm in my calling. And so I'm being obedient to God. So I know I'm out here doing God's work regardless.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that idea of holding space, because whether we're just trying to get people to realize their own potential, trying to or even if you are an active missionary and want for people to convert, like whatever your end goal is, you have to understand that you're working with people for a reason and they may not be there. Yes. And so not whip people across the head with whatever your belief is or the Bible or whatever. You have to leave space for them to discover themselves and what their path means for them. And that's for coaching or any aspect of life. It's just, where is life trying to take me and how can I dip my toe into this pool of self-actualization and discovering my potential? Yeah. And if we're yelling at people, get over your fear, just jump into the water, it's not that deep. They don't even have the chance to see for themselves that the water is shallow. They're just focusing on you yelling and screaming at them.
Yes, perfect example. Yeah, I learned how to swim by being pushed into a pool. Totally. That's not the move. That's not the move.
Traumatized.
Yeah.
So you are a very successful coach, an entrepreneur. You do a lot of things, but when you look at faith in Christianity, in that word ambition, it's kind of a dirty word almost in some contexts. And how can we reframe ambition and success within the context of Christianity? Because a lot of times we're told to, that being humble or having humility means that you are just there, you don't want anything for yourself or want anything for your life, but you step 2 toes or 10 toes down within your purpose, wanting what you want, doing what you do. How?
Yeah. And I think it's important before I answer your question to say, I'm not just stepping out here, doing what I want to do. I'm also charging people money for it, right? I'm saying I am here to help and you got to pay me, right? And I think that's also a hard pill for so many people to swallow, that as Christians, we're allowed to charge money for our work. So yeah, I just wanted to name that. It's such a, I won't say it's a hard question. It's just, we could have a whole nother episode on this topic right here because it's so layered and it's so deep. So I think, ooh, okay, I might make some folks mad. Here we go. I think that there are a lot of preachers, teachers, churches out there sharing bad, harmful, and inaccurate doctrine that says that money is evil and that ambition is the opposite of virtue. Right? I think that there's a lot of that out there. It's very easy to find those messages in being preached, right? And we have to do, like, I think the church in general needs to do a better job of being unambiguous in reminding us that God desires us all to be successful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's literally scripture, right? Like, God wants to give us the desires of our heart. The condition of that, though, is that God wants us to seek him first, right? So it's not desiring success or money or material wealth that is bad. It's when we want those things more than we want to be in right relationship with God, right? When we get the order of it, when we have our priorities messed up, right? And when we decide that chasing after wealth is a more worthy endeavor than making sure that our souls are right, right? Like, that's when we get things messed up. But when we start to see our businesses as vehicles that provide us resources to do more of the work that God wants us to do, right? Like, that's a good thing, right? And it's a tool that God connects us to so that we can do more, right, out here in the world. Likewise, the Bible is full of examples of people being entrepreneurs, of people like using the principles of entrepreneurship to actually get closer to the thing that God has for them. The Bible is literally full of these examples. And it's also full of examples of God blessing people with wealth and, with relationships and with fame and notoriety and all that stuff when they do what God tells them to do, right? So I think we have to stop villainizing people for wanting something other than just their faith. And I think it's time out for villainizing people for being blessed. It's not wrong.
Wrong. It's not. And I think, I like the scripture that you quoted. And I see it in another way too, as in God will, if you have all of your things in alignment, right? God will give you the desires of your heart, as in your desires, the things that you want will come from him. And in that way, there's no way for them to not be fulfilled because it's a part of your calling.
Exactly.
There's no way in that sense that it can be dirty or bad to be an ambitious person, because the very desire that you have comes from God.
Exactly. And of course, this is multi-layered when you talk about women in entrepreneurship and in the church, right? Because there's more mixed messages about the position of leadership and whether or not women should hold leadership, and right, whether or not women are capable and all of that kind of stuff. And my Bible clearly says that, women are just as much the image of God as men are, which means that we are capable. And God desires to make humanity in general, so including men and women, like partners in ruling and having dominion over this earth. Like, having dominion over the earth means we get to be in charge too.
Yeah. And I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk more about ambition, because I feel like there's one thing to want what we want, but a lot of times when we think about some of the goals that we have, a lot of other people have those goals too. They may look different and manifest differently in other people's lives. And so that gives way to this hairy little monster called comparison. So how do we stay true to our own journey and not compare ourselves and ruin our joy?
So as a coach, I think I have maybe a surprising take on comparison.
Mhm.
So I don't think that we should try to stop comparing ourselves with others because it's impossible. And anytime we try to make ourselves do something that is like against our human nature, it's a setup for, failing and being frustrated, right? And it can actually intensify the problem that we have, right? I think as an alternative, we should see comparison for what it is, and that is inherently neutral. Comparison is neither good nor bad. It is a way of seeing things, and we can use comparison as a tool. And just like any other tool, we can use it to create and build, or we can use it to hurt and tear down, right? So when we use comparison as like a tool for self-harm, it's usually based in scarcity,
Mhm.
right? It's believing that their success means my failure in some kind of way, right? But if we can root our comparison in abundance instead, and if you can't get to abundance, try for possibilities, right? If you can root your comparison in possibilities, suddenly comparing your path to someone else's path or your success to someone else's success is not as harmful, because if there's an infinite number of paths that lead to success, it doesn't matter what path you're on and how far down it you are. I can, there's a totally different path that's available to me that can still lead to success. And
Mhm.
likewise, if I can believe that there are an infinite number of ways to be successful, right? An infinite number of definitions for success, then your success does not have to be a threat to my success, because it gets to just be different instead. And when we root ourselves in that philosophy right there, and then we look at things through the lens of comparison, like, I wonder how she did that versus what I'm doing. Now we get to use comparison to help ourselves get further along than we would get on our own.
That's powerful. And I love how you reframe that, because we're never going to stop comparing, but we can take, the envy out of it and the scarcity mindset and lack mentality out of it, and know that we're good on our own and our journey is ours.
Yes, exactly. That's the point.
Yeah, that is the point. So before I let you go, because you've given us so many gems, any final words of wisdom you have for us today?
So if we're gonna just anchor back to confidence, I'll say this. Just because you're confident doesn't mean that it won't be hard. Like, confidence is not a silver bullet. It's not a magic pill. It's not a get out of jail free card for the hard parts of life or whatever journey you're on. So you can be confident and it can be hard. And that doesn't mean that anything has gone wrong.
I love that. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic.
This has been so much fun. Thank you for having me.